I didn't understand how Robusta got such a bad rep. Because the frameworks in this dichotomy of superior inferior between these two coffee species, I did not see replicated in any other agricultural product. We're never like, ooh, you drink white wine? That's so gross.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Sahra Nguyen is the founder of Nguyen Coffee Supply, a progressive coffee company that is bringing Vietnamese coffee into focus in the coolest way. On this episode, we talk with Sahra about why she decided to focus on Robusta, a species of coffee that is grown widely in Southeast Asia but lesser known in the United States. This is all rapidly changing thanks to Sahra, and we get into why her work at Nguyen is bringing this delicious coffee to the mainstream. Sahra Nguyen, welcome to This is Taste. How are you?
I'm great, Matt. Thank you for having me.
It's really cool to meet you finally. I've bought your beans and your coffees over the years, and I think, coffee is a micro trend here, and I think we have some listeners who are tuning in just for coffee interviews. And, what, of course, struck me first was that you are championing both Vietnamese coffee, but Robusta coffee, or Robusta coffee.
Robusta.
I think we're calling it Robusta. We decided off mic at the restaurant we're calling it Robusta. I'd like to get a sense to start Robusta as a coffee. What is it, and how does it represent a coffee that is wonderful and beautiful, but less represented than Arabica?
Yes. We're going to need more than 30 minutes here, Matt.
I know.
Okay, so Robusta is a coffee species. So in the coffee world, there's Robusta, there's Arabica. Think like red grapes, white grapes, right? And Robusta makes up about 40% of the total coffee production in the world. So it's by no means a small bean. It's just, like you said, less represented, less known. Key differences between Robusta and Arabica are caffeine content. Robusta has nearly double the caffeine content of Arabica, so more function, more energy. Flavor profile. Robusta coffee beans have up to 60% less fats and sugars than Arabica, which really means a more bold, dark chocolatey, nutty profile, whereas Arabica can really skew more fruit forward and citrus forward.
Love that explanation, and I think the 40% of world production is striking, but it gets about 0.4% of the press. And we talk about Arabica coffees, and we love Arabica's single origins, and really all the specialty coffee outside of yourself tends to be Arabica. But if you drink Robusta or Robusta, I'm gonna fluctuate. I feel like you're going to open up a new world of coffee. I personally really like the flavor profile. It's different. And, of course, roasting means a lot. And you're a roaster. And we're going to get into your journey to become a roaster. But really, when you're thinking about marketing Robusta, what are your challenges right now?
Yeah. When we first started, back in 2018, it was really challenged to market Robusta because we were entering this social context where Robusta was basically deemed inferior to Arabica. And all over the internet, if you Googled Robusta or Arabica, you would just see Robusta was deeply maligned. And there was such a stigma against Robusta. I was honestly so confused walking into it. I didn't understand how Robusta got such a bad rep. Because the frameworks in this dichotomy of superior inferior between these two coffee species, I did not see replicated in any other agricultural product. Yeah. We're never like, ooh, you drink white wine? That's so gross, right? Like, it doesn't exist. So this was really like the beginning of me trying to unpack this and then address it. So when we first started, because we were entering this stigma, we were essentially challenging the status quo, which was really difficult because a lot of people were like, that's gross. Why are you selling Robusta? Like, Robusta is like inferior.
Yeah, a lot of people, it was like the hospital coffees, like
yes.
the gas station coffees.
Yes.
That's like the line of Robusta. Like if you even went 5 years ago,
right,
before Nguyen Coffee Supply like launched and became what you are.
Yes. And you know what? And I want to acknowledge that there is some truth to that, right? Like, yes, there is some historical systemic truth to the way Robusta has been channeled into the coffee experience. So Robusta for so long, because it's a robustly growing bean, a lot of industries focus on volume. And so they they focus on volume versus quality, which is why Robusta has been pushed into a lot of these channels, such as instant coffee or maybe bodega coffee, right? Like there is truth there. However, we were coming in and saying like, okay, that's the truth. And where do we go from here? How do we make it better?
Yeah. Well, we'll get to your journey and we'll get some of the products you're creating. You launched an RTD line, which I'm sipping on right now. And I think it's so excellent. And I love, of course, Vietnam as a coffee region, so essential to specialty coffee, to all coffee. And you're really shining a light. Let's zoom out a bit, though, and talk about coffee and just like the discourse around coffee, because I still think today, I've been thinking about this recently, I'm working on a piece, I've been thinking about how still today, if you talk about coffee and you say anything more than I like it with milk, there is a tendency for people to assume you're a quote coffee snob, and there's like some kind of like there's like an unsettling, there's a feeling that you don't want to talk about coffee because you don't want to be considered a snob or a jerk. But like, how do you observe this first? And second, how do you get people to actually talk about coffee and not feel weird about it?
I definitely observed this coffee snobbery vibe when we were building, and actually thought it was the opposite of what you said, where I felt like it was within folks who, if they wanted their coffee with milk and sugar, if they didn't know how to use a scale, then they didn't feel comfortable talking about coffee because they would feel judged for not knowing more about coffee. And so I definitely feel like there was so much elitism that was happening in this like quote unquote third wave. When I try to analyze it, I feel like it was because there was such a focus on extraction science and mastery, which I think is so beautiful for so many reasons. However, that somehow translated into coffee snobbery, and it became like, if you're not drinking coffee like this, then you're just not a good coffee drinker. And I think that idea is totally preposterous and needs to stop.
I'm like, fuck the flavor wheel.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm going to keep saying that because I think when you prescribe to your end user that you should be tasting bergamot and tar and all these lactic acids in coffee, it makes people really shut down. And you want coffee to be for everyone, but you also want good coffee and you want people to pay, but you don't want people to feel alienated, and telling people they need to taste key lime pie or whatever in coffee makes me angry. Yes. So I feel like, yes, thank you.
Oh my gosh, I still feel your anger as well. Do you?
Yeah, do you, exactly. Do you in many ways. And I think Nguyen Coffee Supply represents, of course, you as a founder, you're not like if you go to a coffee expo, especially like a female founder, very few female founders in coffee. Let's take us back a little bit. This isn't an origin story show, but I'd like to get a sense about when you started thinking about coffee as a real business. Where were you? You know, you went to college in Los Angeles and you have a background in media and you have another career outside of coffee, but clearly coffee struck a nerve. What inspired you to start the company?
Yeah. You know, I feel like I was an outlier in so many different ways when I first started. So prior to starting Nguyen Coffee Supply, I had zero experience in coffee, zero experience in importing and roasting. I didn't even know how to use a scale, right? I was a full-time filmmaker and journalist, freelancing in New York City. So a complete opposite experience. And it really started because as a freelancer in New York, I was spending a lot of time in coffee shops. And I started noticing these macro trends of like matcha popping off and chai popping off. And I was like, oh, these are Asian beverages entering U.S. mainstream culture through cafes. And then I started seeing Vietnamese iced coffee popping off on these menus, except they weren't using Vietnamese coffee beans, right? So this was like an early signal of like, okay, there's this interest in this Asian beverage, but there's actually a void in the market.
I feel like I felt you because I think in observing coffee and you see these like wonderful cold coffee drinks on menus and, you know, G&B in LA, wonderful, you know, kind of like pioneering the way cold coffee is served. But then you would see the occasional Vietnamese coffee. And yeah, there was like a disconnect between origin and the actual end. And to me, that felt like I fully agree with you. Like, I'm glad that you could like build this company. You're a roaster too, and that's kind of like buried in the lead. You're a founder. You speak a lot of conferences, and you're really cool. But like the idea, and I say but because there's a whole nother world of roasting. That shit is fucking hard, and like you are doing it in a high level. How did you learn to roast? What the heck?
So, well, when we first started, we started roasting at a shared roasting facility, and the only way they would let us rent the Probot was if we took their roasting course, which makes sense. It's like, hop on this 400-degree machine, but you have to take a lesson first. Of course, that makes sense. So I took a roasting course. It was like a 4-week roasting course just to be able to have access to this machine. And then from there, I just started roasting every week. And when we first started, I was on the Probat, which is a manual machine. So I had to really develop all of my senses manually. And then over time, we were able to transition to like a production roaster, which had an automatic profile. But yeah, to date, I've developed all of our roast profiles that you can find on our website.
So when you're working in the manual Probot, which is amazing if you can see those, are you like using like all senses, right? You're hearing the crack, you're hearing like, you're looking at the colors.
Yeah.
How do you get a
Smelling
sense? Smelling it. I mean, it's so nuanced. And as we've said on the show with all the coffee folks, it's really the roaster's responsibility to represent origin. That's the responsibility. That's what folks maybe don't realize about coffee is you can do all the work in origin. We can talk about the coffee farms in Dalat that you work with. But if you come back and you burn the coffee and you over roast or over mature it, not good. How did you feel about that responsibility?
It was definitely a big responsibility, and knowing that I was entering the industry with the stigma against Robusta, against Vietnamese coffee, I definitely felt a lot of pressure to represent Vietnamese coffee in a new light. And in a lot of ways, at this time, there was nobody that I found in New York roasting Vietnamese coffee, or let alone a Robusta bean. Well, the first time we had imported our very first pallet greens, literally the roastery folks were like, "We've never had a Robusta bean in here."
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was definitely a lot of responsibility to like find my own personal journey in roasting and find the style and the preference that I felt like could be an entryway for other people. So, for example, our very first release of 100% Robusta was a medium roast because I knew that the palate in the US was light roast and Arabicas. And I didn't want to like shock the system by offering a Robusta and a dark roasted Robusta, even though that is the popular style in Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
So I had to think a lot about like the social culture context in the US and try to find like a access point.
It's really threading the needle there because you want to represent origin and style and Vietnamese roasting techniques, but you also need to sell coffee. We're going to go back in the process and talk about origin and green coffee. So how do you at New Wing Coffee Supply and your team, how do you think about origin? And are you in Dalat at your farms is it a winter season or spring? Like, tell me a little bit more about what origin is like when actually harvesting the coffee cherry.
Yeah, harvest season starts like late October, early November, and usually wraps by end of January. And then the greens kind of sit for a month, and then the first shipment can go out in March, right? So our primary source of coffee today is in Dalat. We've been working with a main producer since 2016, but over the years we have expanded like our network to other producers in Sơn La, in Buôn Ma Thuột, and in Đắk Nông. And I go back every year to really work with our producers, to listen to them, to learn from them, to kind of share what I'm seeing on the market on our side and hear like the challenges they're experiencing. And, you know, over the last 5 years, the cost of our greens have gone up nearly 3x.
Wow.
Because of the work, the collaboration that we've done together to improve the quality of the beans.
That's amazing. Let's sit on that for a second. You're deciding to pay this much because I think that's a responsibility thing. I had Jeff Watts on the show. He's used to buy coffee at Intelligentsia, and for you to create a sustainable system, you want to give equity back to the farmers. So when you say the cost went up 3x, those are kind of at your choice, right?
Yes.
Because you're deciding that you want to pay more for this coffee and get it to a place that makes sense for the American market.
Yes.
Now, how do you, as a founder and as a business owner, deal with that kind of investment of 3x increase? The coffees aren't increasing 3x.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, we haven't raised our prices. We've actually just brought our prices down. Because our mission is to rewrite the narrative on Robusta. And you can't just talk the talk.
Yeah.
You have to do the work. If we understand that Robusta has been channeled into a conventional or like in cheap coffee market.
Commodity coffees.
Commodity, yeah.
But sold by weight, not by origin.
Exactly. Because there's been a lack of investment to improve the crop. Definitely not to the same degree as we've seen with the Arabica species, right? So in order to elevate the species of Robusta and to change people's minds, we have to change it through taste. In order to make the taste approachable, we have to treat it better, right?
Yeah.
So over the years, we've asked our producers to do certain things like, in the beginning, it's like our producer, they've never been offered the opportunity to improve their crop, so they're producing for the market, right? So for example, one of the very, very early issues we had to work through were Quakers. And I was like, Okay, there's about like 5 to maybe 8% Quakers in here, which you probably don't think is that bad, but this is not acceptable in the U.S. market. We must solve this.
Describe what this is for our audience who might not know.
Quakers are pretty much like when they're roasted, they're a very, very light brown color bean, which usually signals an underdeveloped coffee cherry.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is coming down to the hand picking process. Right. So in a lot of places, if they're selling it to just like, traders or whatever, they'll grab all the coffee cherries off the branch, whether they're green, yellow, orange, or red. So there are different levels of ripeness, which means different levels of sweetness. So we had to go and say, you need to hand pick 100% red ripe only. No yellows, no oranges, red only, which takes more time and more labor because the farmers, they go in for a day, they pick all the red. If they're done, they have to go back another day versus grabbing all at once, right?
Let alone all the stones and gravel and all the other shit that gets caught in at these washing stations.
Yes.
And really, it's amazing that you're investing in your farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Are you helping them with like technology too? Are you giving them money to build up their washing stations, all that?
We haven't gotten there yet,
Yeah.
but we have talked about that for sure because our farmer bought a second farm 2 years ago, and now we're talking about building up that facility there. Can I share one more story about the processing?
Yeah, sure.
So a really big piece that we started doing with our Robustas is we transitioned from a natural processing method to a full wash method. And I remember the first time I asked my farmer, can we please do a full wash? Because all of our Arabicas are full wash. I was like, can we please do a full wash on the Robusta? And he was like, I'm just worried that if we do that, you won't be able to sell the Robusta. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, it's going to be too expensive.
Oh.
And I'm like, I understand where you're coming from. Let me worry about that because it costs more to do a full wash. But through these steps, right, now we have beautiful Robustas. You can crack open a bag today. There are no Quakers in there. Full wash, 18 screen size, large and beautiful.
Okay, this is cool.
This is the work, though.
No, this is the work. And thank you for doing it. I mean that. It's like, this is not to get rich, at least now, but I'm joking, but like you are putting up a lot of your own, your equity, your sweat equity to make sure that these farmers are paid. I've met coffee folks at coffee shows whose names are on the bottles who've never been to Origin, which is insane to me. But you're there every year, you're offering them money. I think that's important.
And you know what else, Matt? If we can do this with our Robusta at our farm in Vietnam, this will create a ripple effect for Robusta growers worldwide because now we're elevating the reputation of Robusta. And so now when I go to SCA, especially Coffee Association or Connecting World Coffee in Costa Rica, everyone's talking about Robusta, which is the work that we want to see. And now roasters are like, hey, importer, do you have a fine Robusta? Importers are going to Origin like, hey, farmers, do you guys have a fine Robusta? Now farmers are like, we can make fine Robustas.
It's interesting. I've definitely seen Robusta offered, in all sorts of coffee companies, not a Vietnamese coffee company, but in, we've talked about off mic.
Blue Bottle Coffee. Like it was a year or two ago where Blue Bottle offered their very first Vietnamese blend, which is like so cool. And then I think it was either this year or last year, they offered their first ever Robusta blend series, which is just a signal that, yes, more and more coffee companies are now embracing fine Robusta.
It's really, really cool to see this category grow, and you're definitely a pioneer in it. Let's talk about the end user. I know we're jumping around the path of the coffee. We're going from green. We talked about roasting. But the end user for buying your coffee in Whole Foods, and we'll talk about the channels. But let me ask you, I use personally Chemex. I'm like, 16 to 1, 17 to 1, doing my thing. But like, I feel like Robusta needs to be treated slightly differently. And I think I've kind of messed up your coffee sometimes because I kind of don't know. And I've like played around with ratios.
Yeah.
But how do you homebrew your coffees?
Yeah. So I homebrew our Hanoi roast, which is a 100% Robusta dark roast every morning through the V60. What I found with Robusta is that I actually like to use a lower temperature for water. So maybe with an Arabica, I might do 200 degrees, but with a Robusta, I'll do like between 195 to 198.
Wow.
I can't quite explain the science, but I just find that because Robusta has less fats and sugars, there's like slightly less, I guess you'd call it less nuance than an Arabica. So it's easy to flatten the bean, right? I've also found that the grind size is really, really critical because there's already less sugar. It skews bold. So if it's like a hair too fine, like some Arabicas, like the grind size for Arabica, I'd go a little bit more coarse for Robusta just so that it doesn't risk being over bitter.
So if we're talking about on like a 1 to 30 scale in terms of grind size, what
1 to 30, I'm at like a 16.
16?
Like 14 to 16, depending on the roast, yeah.
And water temperature is really key, what you say. Like 195 is low for Arabica. 200, 205 is kind of the sweet spot for coffee for the water temperatures. And this might sound small, but it's dramatic. And if I'm doing like a 1 to 2 grind and doing it at 205, 207, that coffee might be flattened out exactly. And, it might express bitterness, it might express impurity, but that's not the way it's intended. So my question is, how do we get people to understand that Robusta has a different style of brewing needed?
Yeah, I'd say for any coffee that you bring home, whether it's a Robusta or a blend or a Arabica, I say you just have to play with it. You have to have fun with it. Like, you can't treat every coffee bean or blend the same, right? So, like, your grinder isn't always going to be the same setting, right? Your water temperature isn't always going to be the same setting. Like, when you're brewing a new bean or a new bag of coffee, just taste it. If it tastes too sour, change it up. Maybe, make the grind size more fine. If it tastes too bitter, it's probably over extracted to make the grind size more coarse. Like, I think just like having an open mind and just remembering that like not all coffees are the same, and just to like experiment is the best way to enjoy your coffee.
Well said. I fully agree. That's the best way. And you're buying a bag of coffee, you can get like 6 or 7 batches out of it. So you mess up the first one, just adjust it, and that's the beauty about coffee.
Yeah.
If you're doing it a couple times a day, it's kind of fun to mess around with your ratios. Okay, let's get to the actual product line. So you've got all of these. They're blends, but they're essentially from the Delat farm, but you've got 3 other farms that you're working with. And you've got this RTD that's ready to drink. I'm sipping on the can. How the heck did you get to RTD? That seems bold.
Yeah.
To use a very specific
Pun
word.
intended.
Yeah, exactly.
A bold bean. The RTDs, we were just talking off mic earlier. The RTDs are brutal. And I remember before getting into it, all my friends who were in RTDs were like, don't do it. And I was like, I know, I don't want to do it. But there was a very, very strategic reason why. Back in like 2021, 2020, early 2022, on our website, 90% of all of our customer reviews were 5 out of 5 stars. It was a very, very high proportion of 5 out of 5 stars. And we were like, we need to understand what customers like about our product. So we exported all of our customer reviews and we did a keyword analysis. And we looked for the number 1 trending word. Do you know what the number 1 trending word we found was?
I mean, bold? No. Smooth?
Flavor.
Flavor, yeah.
Flavor.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh my gosh, they love the flavor. So then we were like, we must get people to the flavor experience quicker. How do you do that? Liquid to lips.
Yeah, liquid to lips is great. And I'm like, your friends were right. RTD is brutal. And like, we've had RTD founders on here for many different categories of NA and also alcoholic spirits and our drinks. And man, it is challenging flavor. So when you're launching your RTD, how are you pitching it? Because like there's a lot of cold coffee out there. The bodega downstairs or whatever, the grocery store is like, they've got like literally 18 different cold coffees going on. How are you trying to break through? How are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a clear point of difference. If you walk into a Whole Foods, Sprouts, Target, where we're currently at today, and you look at the RTD set, we are the only can on shelf right now that is made with 100% Robusta cold brew and Vietnamese coffee beans, and has a flavor skew like condensed milk. So we have true differentiation, right? So when it comes to like the category managers, they're always looking for innovation and for things that grow the category. So we're not coming in with an oat milk latte, no shade, but that's not innovation in their eyes. It's not growing the set. So we've had the beans for like 5 years and we were online for 5 years and we tried to like enter retail. It was a slow entrance to retail. We were like in one region with Whole Foods. We launched the RTDs and we launched nationwide with Whole Foods right away, out the gate.
That's great.
Yes. So it just shows that the category of RTD itself is growing, but really within that set, we had true differentiation.
Did you sell?
Yes, we sold.
Yeah, you sold. Like
tons.
It's hitting. Like people are liking it.
It's hitting. Yes.
I love to hear that. Back to the actual coffees. You mentioned those retailers. Are they selling your coffees as well and your RTDs?
September will be the 1 year mark where we've entered every region of Whole Foods. So we're still really early to the game, right? But we're already seeing over the last year that now our beans are gaining traction with retailers because the awareness for the category overall is growing.
I love that. So remind us how we can buy your coffee in the whole bean format. What's the best way to buy it? What are some of the channels? Are you in like Dayglow and some of these like cool multi-roasters and stuff?
I love Dayglow.
Me too.
The beans you can find on our website, on Amazon, and in Whole Foods in the Northeast region.
Do you market to these like these multi-roasters? Like, I love Drip as well. I feel like they should be carrying your stuff too.
Honestly, we have not been marketing to these micro roasters. It just hasn't been, not that we wouldn't like to be there, it just hasn't been a point of focus.
So let me ask you back, we're in New York, you live here, there's some great coffee here. Where are you drinking right now? Where are you going for your coffees?
I actually, Dayglow, I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I live in Bushwick, so, Dayglow is just like a couple of steps away. Love Dayglow, love the creativity in their signature drinks, love their coffees, beautiful space, roaster in the back. People there are so nice. Like we were talking about coffee snobs earlier, like everyone at Dayglow is so nice. So that's been a go-to spot lately.
So what about your cafe future? I feel like you've got brand, you've got this cool identity. Have you thought about it, but like, would you open a cafe?
I mean, would I? Yes, I would. When? Not quite sure. However, I get tempted all the time because, a couple of years ago, we did a 4-month pop-up when we were trying to introduce Vietnamese coffee to New Yorkers, and it was like operating 40 hours a week. And that period was so beautiful for just like building community, educating people about Robusta and Arabica. But it was brutal, like we're operating that. And right now for the company, we're hyper-focused on our new channel, which is retail distribution. So we'll probably stay focused on that for a little while.
Yeah, I think it's probably a smart move to think about that channel and not like, making the like 25 cortados a day, probably make a little more money.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody like gave us like $5 million tomorrow and we could carve out like, I don't know, $1 million for a cafe, maybe we'll do it. But otherwise, just got to stay hyper-focused with our goals and just managing resources with growth.
So you have a Series A deck that you're circulating.
Email me.
This is Taste. We ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. The best fruit.
Mangoes.
Like, do you have a style? Do you like? How do you like to eat them?
I don't know what they're called. The yellow juicy ones. Usually from like Southeast Asia.
Word. The worst vegetable.
I love all vegetables, but I do hate dill.
Oh my gosh, that's the first time dill is hit. We've asked this question a couple hundred times. Dill, definitely dill haters out there. Why don't you like it?
It's just like it's very abrasive with my body. Like I just like it doesn't resonate with me. I just can't stand it. I have such a passion. I just don't like it.
You're probably maybe you got some allergy.
When I see it, it just like really upsets me.
It's interesting because, in Hanoi, chakalavang, such a beautiful dish. You can't do it.
If my mom cooks it, I'll be like, dill on the side, please. I cannot handle it.
Yeah, I could see.
And it's like a really big pet peeve when people overdo with the dill. I'm like, dill is a garnish. Like, it's not a vegetable. But
that's a good point. I think there is some overdoing of the dill.
Yes.
Scandinavian listeners might disagree. There's a lot of dill in that culture. All right, the best dessert.
Tempura ice cream.
Damn.
It's really hard to make.
Wait, stop. I'm thinking like this is like quote unquote Mexican ice cream at Chi-Chi's. This is what goes into my head.
No, it's like it's usually in Japanese restaurants.
I'm like, sorry. I'm thinking one thing, but tell me about tempura ice cream.
It's just like a ball of ice cream that they dip in tempura batter and then they like flash fry it. But I've tried to make it at home and it's like really difficult because you have to freeze the ball of ice cream to the right temperature and then you have to get the oil to the right temperature so that you flash fry so the dough fully cooks, but the ice cream doesn't melt. But sometimes you flash fry it too fast, the dough is not fully cooked, and then So when they get it right, I love it.
Your favorite American fast food chain?
Pizza Hut.
Okay.
Supreme.
Word. Pizza Hut, I think, is underrepresented when we in our discourse about food. Okay. Your favorite cookbook of all time?
I don't use cookbooks.
That hurts. You're in the house of cookbook publishing.
Shout out to Mama Nguyen. She teaches me everything.
Respect the take. I appreciate it.
I just don't use measurements. Everything's just like a feeling.
I feel it. That's okay. Okay, we're gonna offline. I'm gonna send you a few books.
Okay,
we're gonna trade.
I do have a few. I should shout out Jing's new book.
Fly by Jing. Yeah, I love that book.
Yeah,
the Book of Szechuan.
Yes, the Book of Szechuan. It was a beautiful book.
It's a beautiful book. I'm glad we could get one book out of you. That's good. Okay, that's a great one. Okay, your favorite coffee bar in America?
Off the top, I have to go back to Dayglow.
Yeah, it's good.
It's been a frequent one in my mind.
It's a good spot.
Beautiful.
Your favorite coffee bar in not America?
It has to be. I would say what's coming to mind right now is like Boscosaurus in Vietnam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about it. Take us there.
It's a specialty coffee roaster cafe in Vietnam, and it's like all glass windows, and they roast on site, and they have beautiful menus. It's just
What city is it in?
delightful. It's in Saigon.
In Saigon.
Yeah.
Sounds like an amazing place. I'd love to go back to Vietnam and try some coffees.
Yeah.
I love that.
We should go.
It's a fun place. I've been a few times. Amazing place to visit. Why should we visit Vietnam?
It's changing so fast. It's like the population is extremely young. There's a lot of like international energy going in there. And then it's met with like internet, digital age. And so there's just a lot of innovation happening there. So it's a very exciting place to be right now.
Very cool. A cuisine you would like to learn more about?
Dominican food.
Interesting.
I eat it all the time.
Yeah.
I've never cooked it. I actually don't understand a lot about it. But
Do you have a
I
favorite
order
dish?
it. It's the rice and peas with a stewed chicken.
Yeah, dope dish. I love that. Last one, your favorite sandwich?
Banh mi. Of course.
Number one in our sandwich draft we had about a year ago.
Yeah. Do you like the cold cuts? Or do you like the other special ones? Like,
I mean,
deli meats or like the grilled pork or...
Exactly. So I like when there's a cooked meat on it. Of course, I like an aioli.
The aioli. It must be an aioli. Like, I judge banh mi spots by the aioli.
Yeah.
If it's white, it's a no-go. It has to be like a golden yellow.
Love that. Okay, where are you getting them in the States, or are you making them yourself?
It's tough in the States. However, there is one place where if my one go-to banh mi spot in Brooklyn is this place called DM Eatery in downtown Brooklyn. They make their own aioli, so it's like chef's kiss.
I'm going to go there. Thank you for the rack. Sarah, what a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
This is so much fun. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Eliza, we are back with three things. What is your first thing?
My first thing is that I was in LA recently visiting my family, and I went to the Formosa. Have you been there before?
No. The Formosa.
The Formosa Cafe is one of the longest running restaurants in Los Angeles. It is a old school Chinese place. It was opened in 1939 originally, and it was immediately a destination for people like Elvis and Sinatra. This former prize fighter named Jimmy Bernstein started it, and then a Hong Kong-born chef named Lam Quan came in, and he ran it for a long time, and it was passed down through his family. And then in 2017, I believe it was going to close, and this group called the 1933 Group that runs a couple, I don't want to say theme restaurants because I think that has a negative connotation, but they just reopened Tale of the Pup, which is another old school hot dog stand in LA. They're very interested in kind of place-driven, nostalgic LA restaurants. They took it over. And so I just wanted to go because the inside is so cool. They have the oldest red train car in the United States. They have all of this like super old school Chinese restaurant designed inside and old Chinese American movie stars on the wall. So I went mostly for the vibe, but I thought the food was good too. I had orange chicken, which is like not something I normally order, and it was really good orange chicken, and they're doing fun drinks. And when I told my parents I was going, they were like, "Oh, the Formosa. What an iconic place. I haven't been in so long." So I think it should just be on top of everyone's mind when they go to LA. It's kind of a fun place to go.
Is this the same group that has Genghis Cohen?
I don't think they have Genghis Cohen. They have Sassafras, which is kind of like a bluesy kind of bar in West Hollywood. They do a lot of bars and not a ton of restaurants necessarily.
I see.
But I liked it. It was great.
It's a name that I know of with LA, but I've never been, and I'm heading to LA next week, and maybe I'm gonna stop by.
Yeah, it's definitely a piece of like old Hollywood history. It was almost bulldozed so that Warner Brothers could build a parking lot, and then it actually became historically landmarked in the city, I believe, which is how it was maintained in part. But if you're driving around Santa Monica Boulevard over there, you should definitely go.
I'm finally going to Cato. I'm excited.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. A future three things, maybe.
Future three things will be there. I'll have to have an LA. I have a couple great spots to check out in LA. So yeah.
What's your first thing?
My first thing is actually it's podcast related. We're on a podcast. You listen to our show. I wanted to shout out an app that is in the podcast realm. It's called Hark. Have you heard of it at all?
Yeah. I feel like people like it.
Yeah, people do like it. And you know what? I like it. I'm one of them. Because here's what it does. It basically rounds up podcasts into 4 to 5 minute segments. And it sends you a daily newsletter with several of these thematic these episodes. If it's like something related to politics, there's like a roundup of 4 or 5 podcasts related to a topic like gun control or the presidential election. But there's also something they call Hark lists, which are by like evergreen theme. And I've found that they have a lot of really cool food-related Hark lists, and I'm going to link to a couple of them in the show notes. One is the history of summer foods, and they have episodes by the podcast Proof, how Jell-O became a salad. There's something from Gastropod about ice cream, and then Splendid Table BA's Dinner SOS, and a lot of our friends in the podcasting world show up. They also had this is cool. They also had a whole episode of Chappell Rowan coverage, like 4 minute, different takes. It's like a cool way to digest podcasts and these little clips. And the great thing is, and we'll be appearing on there too, I believe you can go to the full episode very easily. So I love it.
Cool. I'll be sure to check it out.
What's your next thing?
My next thing is that I just went to Eel Bar, which is the new restaurant opened by the folks that do Hearts and Servos and The Fly. And, you know, it's in an empty restaurant place on Broome Street that I walked by for years and wondered what was going to happen there. And I think they did such a cool job with the build out. It's really beautiful inside. They have kind of smoked subway glass tiles. There's a bar. And then on the other side of the bar, they have kind of nice booths to sit in. And so it was like a very hot day and I kind of needed to be in the air conditioning drinking something cold, and it was kind of the perfect destination for that. They're doing gildas a couple different ways, which is, you know, the anchovy pepper skewer situation, which I really liked. I also had a really good piquillo pepper stuffed with crab, which I think is kind of an iteration I've been seeing around the city right now. So I just love all of their restaurants, and I think it's fun to have another one in the mix.
Definitely a fan favorite for sure, this restaurant group. And I feel Eel is like a place that has gotten lots of attention this year. And I feel like we're approaching the times when the magazines and the newspapers list their best new restaurants of the year. And I feel Eel is going to be on there.
Yeah, I definitely think there's like a larger seafood movement happening in New York right now. Like Penny, which opened above Claude, is also doing a stuffed piquillo pepper.
Yep.
So
there's also Strange Delight.
Yeah, Strange Delight, which I love, which opened recently as well. And I think, you know, that's just how people want to eat. And it's cool to see that that's happening. And I know that Eel Bar has been in the works for a long time. I think even before the pandemic, they had the space. So it's nice to see it finally opening.
What about Bar Contra? What are you hearing about that? Fab and Jeremiah's Bite.
Oh, yeah. My friend Nachi is the sous chef there.
Okay.
So I've been wanting to visit her. I actually just went last night to a party that was at Bar Contra, but they weren't open and it was a private event.
Yeah.
So I just got to try a couple of things. I had their cocktail that is supposed to be like a rum and Coke cocktail, but it's with Pisco and Averna and lime. But the combination does taste a lot like rum and Coke. So I thought that was cool.
Pisco, Averna, and lime sounds so summery.
Yeah, they call it a Pisco Cola. So like Pisco Cola. And it does taste a lot like a rum and Coke.
I feel I had those guys on like episode like 30 or 40 of the podcast, and I've been meaning to have them back. They've been really like conquering upstate with some new spots, and we're going to do that. We're going to have the team back.
Yeah, let's have Jeremiah and Fabian on for sure. What's your next thing?
Okay, I have to shout out a former guest, Haven's Kitchen Aoli. Aoli, what is Aoli, yeah. Anyways, it doesn't matter. It's really good, and you should buy it. It's really one of these products that, you know, it's not just mayonnaise, right? It's actually more of a condiment. They have flavors like zesty jalapeno, lemony chili, and herby yuzu. So like these like global flavors that are really interesting, and you can put them on fish or meat or vegetables. But here's the kicker: you can make like egg salad with it, which I did. You can also put it on like a tomato and cheese sandwich. I just really like the brand Haven's Kitchen. Like we have a great episode. I'll link to the show notes. And really, I think like taking on a category like Aoli or whatever you want to call it is bold. You know, it's a category that we always kind of seek out. Like condiments are really big, but it's maybe not the sexiest category, and they've done a cool job with it.
My last thing is, I love a good pop-up, and I went to a really good one this past weekend. Phoebe Tran, who's the chef of Bibep, which is a really great Vietnamese pop-up here in New York, was doing a block party at Botany Cafe, which is a really beloved coffee shop in Bed-Stuy. She was doing Vietnamese stuff grilled on the sidewalk. I had really good shrimp over rice. Also, like a ambient room temperature, stewy, like tomato Romano bean situation that was really good. It started absolutely pouring in a way that felt biblical, and she was still just slinging food. They had a tent over them, so the food didn't get wet. Everyone else got soaking wet, but it did not keep anyone down.
It's fun, though. It's summer in New York. It's really
yeah, and we all just kind of waited it out. Mina Park, who does the kind of cake pop-up 99, was doing slushies, melon slushies that also were really good. And there was a DJ. The folks from Head High, which is a really great art bookstore in Bed-Stuy, were doing one of the DJ slots. So it felt very much like a community event in a fun way. And I just have to give credit to Phoebe for making so much amazing food in the total downpour. And she's doing more pop-ups in New York this summer.
We'll link to it in the show notes for sure. A good follow here. So thanks for sharing that.
What's your last thing?
We're going to be working on our fall cookbook preview coverage imminently, and it'll be dropping soon. But I wanted to throw one cookbook into the mix because she's been on the mind, the author, Martha Stewart.
I've heard of her,
You've heard of her. She's been on like all the Olympic covers of Snoop Dogg. It's quite cute. I like that. She's publishing her 100th cookbook. And to acknowledge 100 cookbooks, she's releasing a book called Martha Stewart, The Cookbook, which features 100 recipes from her past. And I have to say, this book is like really, really cool because holy shit, 100 cookbooks.
How is that even possible?
I'm trying to do the math myself. She's been in her life like for a while, but like that's a lot
her
of cookbooks.
first cookbook came out in the 80s, so I guess it's about 40 years to have been making cookbooks.
She was dropping, like 3 or 4 a year at some point. I'm sure with the TV shows are humming along, and she's doing yearlies. I mean, I don't understand. Like, I guess the math is real. Like, it's being billed as the 100th cookbook. So,
but how special to look back on all of them. So, are there new recipes in the cookbook, or it's all kind of greatest hits?
These are classic recipes. Eliza, potato pierogies are there. There's paella, a brioche bread pudding. The kind of Martha Stewart, which is like the really handcrafted, well tested recipe with a little bit of a twist. Really good craftsmanship. I love her recipes. But I can't believe 100 books for Martha.
Well, congrats to Martha. That's a crazy accomplishment. I love to see it.
Thanks for sharing your 3 things.
This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbar. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com. And make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.